And now, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, a special hello goes out to the Director of Media for the Boston Bruins alumni, Mr. Mark Beaudin. I see you, Marky.
Look at them slugging each other.
The goal scored by number 4.
Number 99, center Wayne Gretzky.
Number 9, Bobby Hull.
If I may have your attention.
Toussaint 6, Mario Lemieux. Number 9, Gordie Howe.
If I may have your attention, please.
Welcome to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast, the home of behind-the-scenes interviews, stories, and memories that celebrate the heritage of the great game of hockey. The Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is hosted by Mark Beaudin. Episode 13 of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast is a tribute to NHL and WHA veteran Ab McDonald, who passed away on September 4, 2018 at the age of 82. Ab played 762 regular season and 84 NHL playoff games, followed by 2 seasons in the World Hockey Association, where he was the Winnipeg Jets' first captain. Ab's a Winnipeg, Manitoba native. He won the Stanley Cup with the Montreal Canadiens in 58 and 59, and then again with Chicago in 1961. He actually scored the game-winning and Stanley Cup-winning goal in the final game of the 61 finals. Ab finished with 182 goals and 248 assists for 430 points during his 14-year NHL career with Montreal, Chicago, Boston, Detroit, Pittsburgh, and St. Louis. He was the first ever captain of the expansion Pittsburgh Penguins in 67-68. Ab was very well liked and highly respected as a person and a player. To help us pay tribute to Ab, we've invited 3 of his friends from his WHA days on the show, and they are legendary Winnipeg broadcaster and Winnipeg Jets historian Peter Young, followed by WHA original Winnipeg Jet Norm Beaudin, and finally the great WHA goaltender and also, of course, Winnipeg Jet original and close friend of Ab McDonald's, Joe Daley. We're joined by broadcaster Peter Young, and Peter, the loss of Ab McDonald is a real loss for the hockey community in Winnipeg.
Yeah, one of the real legends in Winnipeg, of course, and Abby was the captain, and then he passed those duties on to Lars-Erik Schuberg, who also passed due to cancer, but many, many years ago, and those were the 2 WHA Jet captains until they moved into the NHL, and you couldn't have 2 better ones and 2 better human beings and better hockey players than Lars-Erik Schuberg and Abby McDonald. Just revered here in Winnipeg, big part of the community, great part of all the charitable obligations that befit guys that retire in their hometown, and just a really really legendary figure who. Coincidentally, I moved here 2 years after the WHA started, so I didn't start broadcasting for the Jets till the 1974 season, and we moved into a suburb of Winnipeg, and coincidentally, one of our neighbors just across the street, who we became great friends with, they were close friends with Ab and his wife, and so, I met Ab in a different light when I saw him as just a neighbor and a friend. In fact, he was the godfather to one of the children of this neighbor, who still remains a great friend to this day. So, it's more than hockey that he did. He was immersed in the community and really found it difficult to say no to anybody.
He obviously is one of that group of guys in Winnipeg. I think of Duke Edmondson and Larry Horning and Bob Wojtowicz, the early crew of the Jets, the originals, and then going on through time, with Joe Daley, Normie Beaudin, guys like that. It seemed like a very close group during their career and then after their career. The guys who were in Winnipeg, they seemed to have a great rapport, not only among themselves but with the fans as well.
Well, I mean, it's just coincidental that I talked to Norm today. I mean, Norm is, I'm sure you've heard in that part of the country, the tragedy of the Humboldt Broncos junior team back in April when 16 players were killed in a bus crash. Normie knew one of the families, and in fact, we talked today about doing a charity game, but he also, played with Abby, and Norm was the assistant captain, and Ab was the captain in the first year, and Abby, in fact, scored the very first goal for the Winnipeg Jets in that against the New York Raiders in day one of the league. So, the camaraderie is unbelievable. Joe Daley was a very, very close friend with Abby. Joe still lives here. Norm doesn't. Norm lives in Vancouver. But, the guys that still live here, still golfed with them often, including as recently as, a month ago at the Brian Trottier tournament here that we have every year. And, Billy Lasuk is still here. Duke is still here. Perry Miller is still here. So, the guys do get together and reminisce, and some great stories are told, I'm telling you that.
Right. I can imagine. Well, I also work with the Boston Bruins alumni, and, Ab was a player here for a year. It says a lot about him. He was also the first captain of the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Do you remember what number he wore in Boston?
I have no idea.
He wore number 21 for the Bruins.
Very good. See, that's why I wanted to have you on here, because your depth of knowledge goes even further than I would have suspected. But it's
one of the few places where he didn't. He wore 21 for the Bruins. He wore 20 when he played in the expansion era with St. Louis the first year they came into the league in '67. But everywhere else he was in the teens. He wore 14 here in Winnipeg. He wore 14 in Montreal, and he wore 14 in the great Chicago Stanley Cup team with his great friend Bobby Hull. In fact, Bobby was just in town. We had a WHA reunion for the 77-78 team in May, and thankfully, Abby was there, and he got to reminisce with all the guys, even though he didn't play in that team. There was 20 guys came back into town, right, including 3 or 4 from, Veli-Pekka Ketola from Finland, Heksi Rioranta from Finland, and Anders and Ulf from Sweden. It was just an incredible reunion, and Bobby came in from Chicago. Even though he's a little bit immobile now, those 2 guys sitting at a table, just think of the stories that could come out of a table like that, because, they're legendary, and somebody asked Abby, who are some of the guys you played with? And Abby said, well, there was Beliveau, and then Boom Boom, and Dickie Moore, and Doug Harvey, and Jacques, and Glenn Hall, and Gordie Howe, and Stan Mikita, and Bobby Hull, and we said, okay, that's enough. That's it. That's good. We get the picture. Well, he played with some legendary guys. He
really did. He played for some legendary franchises as well. Not only the Bruins were in a down period then, but he also won the Stanley Cup with Chicago. And
three straight cups with Montreal and one with Chicago. That's pretty good 4 years in a row. 4 years, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, I was
there. Other than the great Oiler teams, I wonder if that's ever happened before. It's certainly not on somebody that's won it on 2 teams. He really, the first year he won the cup and he got his name on the cup. He played with Rochester the whole season, but he got called up for the playoffs, and he only got into 2 games, but that got his name on the cup because he did play in the final. But then, he was a big contributor both in the playoffs and the regular season the next 2 years when they won the cup, and then, of course, they won the cup the next year in 60-61 with the Blackhawks, and so those are pretty impressive numbers when you think of. I'm not going to say he was a journeyman player. He never was a huge goal scorer, but he still ended up playing over 750 games in the NHL and another 150 in the WHA. So, that's close to 1,000 games. And in that era, when there was only 6 teams to start with when he started playing, there weren't that many guys that were making it in the NHL.
Right, and certainly when you played in a 6-team National Hockey League, if you were let's say you were a center, there were only 18 essentially in the entire league. You were playing. I had this conversation with Johnny Busick about a year ago, and he was there with a friend of his. I said, you realize that when Johnny played, he played against a Hall of Fame goaltender every night. So every night, depending on the year, you're playing against Glenn Hall, Terry Sawchuk, Jacques Plante, whomever.
Yeah, there was no nights off in those days.
Right.
You looked across you, and the guy across you was good, no matter who you were.
Absolutely. So it says a lot about Ab.
Johnny Busick, do you still ever keep in touch, or?
Oh, absolutely. We see Johnny. He's still involved with the Bruins alumni, and he still goes to every Bruins game. So
one year in Montreal at the NHL draft, he has a very good friend that was an executive in the Westin hotel chain by the name of Brian Horniak, who was a good friend of mine. We were in Montreal for the draft, and went out for dinner in Old Montreal, and I'd never had muscles in my life, okay, and we were at this fancy restaurant in Old Montreal, and Johnny Busick orders about 10 appetizers of mussels. I think I looked like some seafood by the time we walked out of there that night, but I learned to love something that I'd never tried before.
Well, that's good. That's a good experience too. And as you said, these guys have stories, the types of which, and it's, I guess that when you lose a guy like Ab McDonald, recently Johnny Shella, you lose.
Well, Johnny Shella was. I played junior against Johnny Shella. Johnny Shella's a Thunder Bay boy.
Right.
That was. He played for the Fort William Canadiens when I played for the Fort William Hurricanes. So. I was nowhere near ever as good as any of those guys, because I also played against, guys like the Ouchers and the Faduns and the Trognitzes that, made it in the NHL. But just the thought of some of these guys that, were WHA superstars that we're all getting to the time period now where we're losing some of these guys.
Absolutely.
And it's sad, but, Abby had an incredible life and lived it to the fullest up to a month and a half or so ago, and then, it just struck him so bad. I mean, it was, he went from, I won't say perfect, but still being able to out and play golf in the middle of June, actually the end of June, and to the point that, he lost 45 pounds in the last month, and
wow.
That's it's a sad story.
And we're here with Norm Beaudin, one of our all-time favorite players and an original Winnipeg Jet, and a good friend of the recently deceased Ab McDonald. And Norm, I know it's a sad time losing a great friend like Ab. Can you tell the fans who may not have known him or known a lot about him what type of a man he was?
Well, like you said, we've lost our number one captain for the Winnipeg Jets, and we've lost a great man of hockey, and we've lost a great family man. And I know that the Winnipeg people will certainly miss him, because he was certainly a great ambassador to the game. He's, he was in Winnipeg. You asked him to go to benefits, golf tournaments and raise money, and he was always there to answer the bell. And of course, he was a great hockey player. He was a winner. No matter where he went, he won. And we have nothing but praise for Ab McDonald. And, I'd like to offer my condolences to the McDonald family and his wife, Pat. They were certainly friends of ours from day one when we went to Winnipeg, and he was a great guy to know.
Well, that's very nice of you. And it's guys like Ab McDonald, guys like Norm Beaudin that really make the game great. The players, the people, and it's obviously, as I was discussing with Peter Young earlier, a very close-knit group, that first group of Winnipeg Jets, and stayed close, with a lot of those guys through their post-careers. Can you talk a little bit about the camaraderie that group of guys had?
Well, Az, like I said, was our first captain, and he was the leader right from the beginning, and we had cohesiveness, in our team because of Ab McDonald. He would say, "Okay, guys, we're going somewhere," and we, all follow him. And he kept the team together, and he kept the team loose. And that's the reason we were winning in that first year. So, we can't say enough about the way he led the Winnipeg Jets, and we were happy to be, on his team.
Had you played against or with Ab prior to joining the Jets in '72?
Yes, I played very little against Ab McDonald, but he was a tough competitor, and like we all know, he was with the Blackhawks and won some Stanley Cups, and so he was a tough competitor in the corners, and very, very good with the puck. He saw the ice very well, and he was hard to play against.
We're joined by legendary Winnipeg Jets goaltender Joe Daley. Very few people knew Ab McDonald as well as Joe did, of course, as players with the original Winnipeg Jets and Winnipeg natives. They also contributed a lot to the Winnipeg community, a lot of charity events together, and remained friends throughout their post-career. Joe, I was wondering if you could give us some insights on Ab McDonald, the player, and the person.
Well, Abby was certainly a wonderful player. I mean, he played on some great championship teams, and he was instrumental in a couple of expansion teams, being Pittsburgh and St. Louis, and certainly contributed immensely when the WHA got started in Winnipeg, his hometown. So, as a player, I don't think he's often been regarded as a top-flight player, but I think that's a mistake. Abby played on that great scooter line in Chicago that won the Stanley Cup in '61, and if you ask anybody that ever played with him, you'd find out that he was conscientious and like I say, played the game for 200 feet, which is the size of a rink. And as a person, I don't think you could meet a more friendlier, nicer guy than Abby. He was a fella that cared about everyone, and certainly tried to mentor as many of the young fellas that he encountered along the way, including myself. And I know that as a hometown boy in Winnipeg, he kind of took me under his wing early in my career, and wherever we worked together, we certainly had great times. And as a Winnipegger, I mean, I don't think there's been too many golf tournaments or charity events that Ab hasn't attended and been a contributor to the community in a great way. And certainly as a family man, loved his family and had 5 wonderful kids, and now he's got 7 grandchildren and 1 great-grandchild, and it's too bad that he's not around anymore to cherish those people, and but he'll never be forgotten, certainly here in Winnipeg, and I think all of hockey has lost a great gentleman.
Well, they certainly have, and that's very well said. Joe, it reminds me as you're speaking, it seems that group of, particularly the original Winnipeg Jets, yourself, the Duke Adamsons, and Ab McDonald's and Norm Beaudins, seem to have a real close bond over the years that seems to have even strengthened as time has gone on.
There's no question about that. I mean, there was a good group of us Winnipeggers that came home to get the league started, and even those that joined in. It's often been said that the players that played on that first year team were as closely knit as any group I've ever been associated with, and maybe it was because of the fact that, like I say, there was a number of us from Winnipeg. We were coming home to play. Some left the National Hockey League, and certainly a large group were getting a chance to come out of the minor leagues and earn a few more bucks and play in a league that eventually had to be taken over by the National Hockey League. So that's probably the big reason that we were so closely knit. And then, of course, we can again go back to guys like Abby and Billy Sutherland and Bobby Hull, making sure that we knew what we were there for, along with having a great deal of fun. And Abby was our captain and set a great example for the future captains of teams in our city here. And so it was unique. I don't know. I can't speak for the teams and players of today and their togetherness. I think the group here right now is talked about as being a group that really gets along well together, and I know how important that is in team sport. Is that if you've got a bunch of guys that are willing to go to bat for each other, you can certainly accomplish a lot.
Absolutely. And of course, that all started with your first captain, Ab McDonald. And Joe, it's a great privilege talking to you today. And again, we thank you for sharing your thoughts on Ab McDonald. And we hope to have a chance to talk to you again at some point later down the road.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak about a great friend.
Thanks for joining us for this look back at the life and career of Ab McDonald. When you lose guys like Ab, it reminds you of what a great game it is, and what makes it great is the players and the people. And when you lose guys like this, it's always sad, and they don't make them like Ab McDonald anymore. So again, thanks for listening, and we'll look forward to seeing you on the next edition of the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Thanks for listening to the Pro Hockey Alumni Podcast. Be sure to visit us at prohockeyalumni.org. This episode of the PHA podcast is sponsored by hockeytournaments.com. If you're looking to play in a tournament or just list your tournament, head over to hockeytournaments.com.